the reason I'm having this conversation, I'm glad you brought this out, is that it's very normal for us as salespeople to read the financial news, and
Right.
then in our heads are clicking, okay, this is what I can sell, this is the company to go
Oh
to.
yeah.
But on the other side, for us to read the normal general news, that it doesn't take some time for us to think differently. But if you're in the international
Yeah.
business, it's the thing to watch out for is to look
Yeah.
at the big news.
Exactly. And I'll tell you what, I think we might have discussed this back in 2014 when oil dropped by about 60, 70%. I knew that this was going to impact my business year because at the time about.
Hello and welcome to another video from SaleSAddA. SaleSAddA is a community for sales professionals, a place for us to meet, share, learn, and grow.
Good evening and welcome to the podcast. I'm very happy to introduce Zach. He's a good friend, and he's one of the most experienced intelligent salesperson I know, and I value his inputs. So I thought we would introduce him and take some of his thoughts on today's program. So let me quickly introduce Zach. He's a through and through salesperson. He's been in selling all his life and as a professional for almost 40 something years now. He's also the author of a fantastic book, Global Sales. It's a workbook for the practical salesperson in the international business. I would highly recommend everybody to take a good look at it. What we'll do today, though, is that we will run through a few headlines, global events, and we'll wear our salespeople's hat and talk a little bit about how we view these events and our thoughts on that. Before that, Zach, if you'd like to take a minute to introduce yourself, feel free and go at it.
Well, thank you for that kind introduction, Praveen. And yeah, I've been a salesperson and I've sold all over the world. And I basically make my living now helping international sales managers get better at their job. So by coaching, by giving support services, by serving as a fractional sales manager, those type of activities, that's what I do. And I have a business called Global Sales Mentor. You can find it online. And like Praveen said, you can find my book on Amazon called Global Sales by Zach Selech.
Excellent. So without any further ado, let's start. The first headline for today is the big event from last week, which is the 2.2 trillion stimulus package by the EU. That on the face of it is a whole lot of money. For 27
countries. It does
countries.
seem like a lot of money, doesn't it?
For 27 countries, and when you split it down, that doesn't sound so much, does it?
Yeah, you're right. On the other hand, you also think about in most of the EU, a lot of that money does trickle down pretty well and pretty efficiently. And you take a look at the stimulus program in the United States when they give everybody $600 or something. Is that going to impact imports? Maybe from China, right? Because people are going to rush out and buy something at Walmart, right? But in the EU, that money is going to go to rail systems and hospitals and infrastructure and stuff like that. Usually, I'm sure a lot of it's going to end up, buying TVs from China too, because that's just the way people are today. But I think a lot of it is going to end up. And what I've seen in the past is when money gets shifted around in the big sense in Europe, some of it seems to stick to me, one way or another, right? Like it is interesting because, when Germany, 20 years ago, when Germany was lending money to Greece, the Greeks were sure they were going out and buying, stuff to have fun, but they were also buying, train systems and railway systems and improving their telephone systems and improving their hospitals and so on. And you get that back and forth. So I couldn't quantify this, but I'm going to think that if you are in the business where some of your products get sold into the public sector or into infrastructure, I think we are going to see good buying in 2021 in Europe for those type of products. The hospital medical equipment, the infrastructure for transportation and communication, maybe infrastructure for broadband and for internet stuff, those type of things. I think all those will be affected. Now, my personal history hasn't been that much in consumer goods, but I'm going to think this may do a nice bump to consumer purchasing too. So, that might be impacted as well. But I do feel that we will see a trickle down into the public sector purchasing, which if you are in the infrastructure business, I think you're going to be impacted in a positive way.
So if like you're from the medical industry for a long time, for longest time. So if you saw this headline, would you say, okay, should I start preparing for something in the funnel before the end of next year? Should I look for a sale? How would you plan? What is the thought process?
I think so. So when I see something like this, I'm thinking we are probably going to see, you take a look, virtually all the hospitals in Europe, all the big projects have a solid amount of government funding. I don't want to say it's 100% government because it isn't quite, but they all are impacted by government spending. So from my perspective, some piece of this is going to stick to the medical business. And when you take a look at that, what do hospitals do? They say, well, maybe it's time. I've wanted to get a new X-ray system for a couple of years. This is probably a good year to do that, right? So that does impact some of the capital expenditures. I don't know if it's going to impact, your day-to-day routine. They're not going to use more bandages. They're not going to use more syringes, except, well, maybe syringes for the vaccination program, but that's a limited, the ongoing consumables, I'm not sure are going to be impacted. What may very well be impacted here is hospitals might say, okay, this is the year that I add 20 new ICU beds. This is the year that I add a new X-ray system, that kind of thing. And I think you're going to see this across the board. Again, in the healthcare systems in Europe, you're going to see this in the transportation and the communication, those type of things there. I have to believe there will be some government expenditures, and not all of that is going to come from inside the EU. It's not all going to be Germany selling to Italy and Italy selling to Spain. It's going to be a lot of that's going to be imported in. And so there is room for people who are selling to Europe now to access some of that money.
I think we can bring the next headline. This is actually, they work together, because the next headline is the Greeks leading EU states in funding plans, where the Greek minister is talking about having finalized their plans for the EU grants and loans, and they're ready to submit it to the EU, which I think is very interesting, because if you're in a country that's still considering making a plan, that means the plan will probably be ready in a year, and then they will submit, and then the money is going to come through. So if you're working in a country that's already ready to submit, then that makes it interesting from a sales perspective. And it's a two-way street, because if they already have a plan and you're not part of that plan, then you're missing the bus already.
Right.
So, I mean, talk me through, this is normal stuff for you. You probably did this many times.
So I just have to say, and this is a little mean of me, but this is what comes to mind, is you got to hand it to the Greeks. They see that there's some possible free money coming from other EU states, and they are ready to take it right away. And good for them. And I only laugh at that because I worked a lot in Greece during the years they were preparing for the Olympics. Okay. And they really did some beautiful government work preparing for the Olympics with the public transportation and the communication systems and even hospitals, everything. And apparently they're still having trouble paying for all that money that flow into Greece from other parts of Europe. But here's the thing. When you're looking at Europe as a common market, you know, the original term, remember when we were kids, it was the common market, right? And it's a common market. So it makes sense for everybody to make sure that all these countries are able to spend money and they're able to build up their tax base and they're able to educate their people, etc. Right? So it isn't just a matter of the Greek, you know, I sort of laugh that it's sort of the, you know, the Greeks taking money from Germany, and to some extent on the surface of it, you could say that's it, but really all these countries are cooperating and working together, right?
Correct.
But yes, you know, the plans are in place. If you are smart, you're already in the plan. Now everybody's playing catch up to figure out how to get in. But again, I'm going to guess 22 or 20 of these countries haven't yet put together their plans, and they'll be playing catch up. And these are the ones that if you're not in the Greek plan, you can get into these other plans. But also very often, I mean, depending on what you sell, if you can fit into the specs that were written for somebody else, you might still be able to get into these plans, right? Or if you can find a way to fit into these specs, you can still get in. But there's going to be a lot of money to be spent now building up these economies again. And again, if you're in the business to sell to infrastructure or to governments for the public sector to build things up, I think there are good opportunities this year in Europe.
I also think that I wanted to make 2 points. One is, if you're late, then you must find a way to get a subcontract out of the main vendor, if possible.
Right.
The other way is, if you're not, let's say it's Greece, just for the sake of discussion, let's say it's Greece, and you're out of the game because the government or the people in charge wants to give it to the local company.
Right.
And you're an international company. Right. Then you go the other way around and go to Brussels and make sure you're in Brussels. Because then Brussels finally decides where the money goes.
Exactly. So, and that's the thing. If let's say, for instance, you're an Indian company and you have a perfectly viable solution to a problem that Greece wants to solve, and Greece wants to give that contract to a Greek company, but they're using Brussels money, right? There shouldn't be anything in there that says this has to be Greek. The supplier has to be Greek, right?
Correct.
And if you're cheaper than the local supplier, you can probably contest, or like you said, reach out to Brussels, reach out to the central authorities to try and bypass any local roadblocks that might be in place for you. It's one thing for, say, Germany to make it difficult for American companies to get into Germany for, you know, when they're using German money to build up a German hospital, etc. And you can still contest that when it happens. And you and I have had these discussions before about this type of thing. But if, you know, say Greece, just to use as an example, Greece is using EU money coming out of Brussels to buy something that is supposed to help build up their economy, and they're using a Greek supplier that is more expensive than an Indian supplier, I don't think they have the legal leg to stand on to keep you out. So, you know, there's the type of thing that I think is worthwhile trying to fight and trying to push through.
Correct. I think the only criteria, if anything at all, will be you have to be have an EU office, or you have to have EU presence. That would probably be the only stumbling block.
Exactly.
And they can sorry, carry on.
Oh, and they can certainly come and say, okay, you have to have this ISO number, you have to have the CE mark. They can set in place quality certifications, but they can't say you have to be, a Greek-owned company
Correct.
for this type of project, right?
Correct. So as a salesperson, I always think one doesn't have to be disheartened just because it sounds too far and far-fetched. You just have to go for it.
And I'll tell you what, I always say to people, people will come back and they say, well, we can't sell in Greece because the specs lock us out or something like that. And I'll say, can you get out of the airport or not? Right? Because you could have if there's a legal requirement that says your product cannot leave the airport, right? You can't sell. I'll admit failure at that point. But if legally you can get your product into Germany, you can sell, right? It might be that they want something else because the specs, they're very used to the local spec. But as long as legally you can get it there, right? And this might sound like a funny difference, but I see this all the time. People say, well, the specifications are calling for something else. They're built around the German system because it has to be green and not blue. And our system is blue and we can't paint it green and blah, blah, blah. And you go, okay, is it a legal requirement or is that just what they want? And you have to dig down into that. And then you basically, there's going to be somebody there where you say, look, I know you want it to be green, but we're 25% cheaper and we're just as good. And they'll be like, oh, okay, I'll be fine with that, right? You can't let yourself be stopped because somebody says, no, this isn't, it isn't spec'd this way, or we're not what the customer really wants. Well, dig down into it, right? You have your own benefits. Don't let it stop you because on the surface of it, they want something slightly different from what you have, when you might have benefits that are really huge, right? And they want those benefits.
From a leadership perspective, I think this is like a 12 to 18 month plan from now, from January. I think one must be, as a leader, ready to invest, both in terms of time, people, patience, and then be prepared that some of them are going to fail for sure.
Exactly.
But jump in.
Right.
I think there's nothing to be disheartened because it's 2.2 trillion. There are so many countries. There are blah, blah, blah. I don't know how you feel about it.
Yeah. Now, the other thing that I always hate to hear people say is they're like, well, it's $2 trillion. All I really need is 1/10 of 1%. And I'm like, okay, but what's your plan? How are you going to get that? You still need a plan. Even though you only need a little piece of it, you still need a plan. And you have to understand, well, can you sell your product there, right? If your product, for instance, is really only works in English, okay, can you make a living selling it only in English in the EU, right? Is it legal to do that? Will people buy it? Or if your product is really only good for hot weather countries, I don't know, I'm just throwing things out there. You can say, okay, well, can I make a living selling this in, the Mediterranean countries of the EU, right?
Correct.
You have to figure it out. It's a giant number, but you have to figure out still what makes sense. On the other hand, it's a giant number and it's sort of silly not to try to take what you can from it, right?
Correct. I agree.
There's no reason, I'll tell you what, it used to be, again, and I know India, and I certainly have a huge appreciation for Indian products and technology. But 20 years ago, well, it was difficult to sell a high-tech product from India and Europe, right? Nowadays, people are much more familiar with it. I remember, when we were kids, people used to say, well, Japanese products are crap, right? And then they became high quality. And then they said, well, Korean products are crap. And then Korean products became high quality. And then it was Chinese products, right? So people understand as they get more familiar with it, they understand, and they're not necessarily going to shut you out because of where you come from. It's the same thing. over the years, people have said, well, I don't want to buy American products because they're more expensive, right? And then maybe they're not more expensive. You can't let, the first impression push you away from a market like the EU that is, a rich market. They've been buying from other people for a long time. It's diverse. If you take a look at the EU, there are poor countries and rich countries. There are big countries and little countries. It's a very diverse, rich target to be selling into.
Correct. So I think it's excellent place. It's a good market for all kinds of companies to work in. From all, whether you're a small company or a big company, there is enough of a market for you to make some contribution there.
Yeah,
right?
Especially if you have a product that is selling well in another market, the chances of you figuring out how to sell it someplace in Europe is pretty good, right?
Good.
If you have a product that's total crap, you're not going to, I'm not sure you want to sell it in Europe, right? But if you're selling it someplace else, you can sell it someplace in Europe, right? But you just have to think, is it Romania or is it Germany?
Correct. So let's move on to the next two headlines. I think they're quite interesting. Let me read it out to you. The headline reads, Britain vows to stop funding fossil fuel projects abroad. This is from the UK. The second is from South Africa. Standard Bank to only finance projects in line with the fossil fuel policies, which is they have very strict guidelines on what kind of fossil fuel projects they want to fund, climate change, and so on and so forth. So two different headlines, but I'm beginning to see the dots now. Yeah. And two different parts of the world, South Africa, London. I mean, what was this? If I hadn't seen those two headlines, the dots are not connecting, correct?
And I'll tell you what, I would suggest that they have something to do with the American election too, right? Okay. In that for a few years, Trump has basically been saying, well, we want to support fossil fuel as much as possible. And I think Biden is going to shift away from fossil fuels. So, right. I mean, that's the conventional wisdom.
Right.
So it is interesting. I'm not sure exactly what this means on a tactical basis, what I would do tomorrow in terms of selling. But here's the thing. Okay, and again, I'm going to have to, I'll expose my own political bias here, but I think fossil fuels are on their way out, right? I would not be investing my retirement fund in fossil fuel issues because I think we're slowly going to get to the point where we're using less and less fossil fuels and we're shifting more to renewable energy. That just makes perfect sense to me.
Correct.
And what they say, and I'm not an energy guy, but what they say is that there's just as many potential jobs in the renewable energy, putting up solar panels, putting up windmills, dealing with all of that, right? And I think a lot of people are hesitating to do that shift in the US. And I'm not sure so much in the rest of the world, but I think they were following the US leadership's concept of pushing back on renewable fuels. Okay. But I think I think what would these headlines show me or make me feel? I think they're going to make me feel that those renewable products, that money's going to flow someplace, right? It's going to come out of fossil fuel investments and it's going to go into renewable energy projects. People need that energy, which means if you're selling something that's associated with renewable energy, that money is going to free up in Europe, right? That money is going to free up in other places. Possibly, because you're using European investment outside of Europe, you're going to see this in different parts of the world. So I think that's what these headlines tell me. Now, more importantly, I almost want to say, and again, there are people in Kentucky or Tennessee are probably going to disagree with me, but I would say this is sort of taking the political aspect out of this and making it more rational, right? Because I really think the only reason to be investing in coal or more oil exploration or stuff like that is political. We have plenty of oil. We have plenty of systems, in my opinion. It's coming out, the price is good, etc. So from a rational perspective, I'm thinking investment should be flowing to renewable energy, which is the future.
Right.
So when the government makes a decision like this, when banks make a decision like this, what clicks in my mind is, okay, they're not bowing down to political pressure. They are following rational thought with their investment, right? That's the way I'm looking at it. And I think that's where the sales, it means, okay, will there be other things related to this that follow rational investment plans? And is that going to impact what I can sell and so on? So that's what I'm reading from those headlines from a salesperson's perspective.
The reason I'm having this conversation, I'm glad you brought this out, is that it's very normal for us as salespeople to read the financial news, right, and then in our heads are clicking, okay, this is what I can sell, this is the company to go to.
Oh, yeah.
But on the other side, for us to read the normal general news, it doesn't take some time for us to think differently. But if you're in the international business, it's the thing to watch out for is to look at the big news.
Exactly. And I'll tell you what, I think we might have discussed this back in 2014 when oil dropped by about 60-70%. I knew that this was going to impact my business year because at the time about 60 to 70% of my customers were in oil producing countries. And I knew that the price of oil was going to impact their purchasing power that year.
Correct.
And that was the first time in my life that I really said, okay, I have to keep a careful look at macroeconomics and how this is going to impact my day-to-day life. And I wouldn't say I spend hours a day, but I do think about it every day for a couple of minutes and a few hours a month. I sit down and I carefully think this stuff through because, even an election, I'll tell you what, for me, and this might sound really, really funny, but when there's an election going on in Nigeria, I know everything that I'm doing there is going to slow down for 90 days, right? Nobody is interested in doing any business.
Correct.
So it's worthwhile keeping an eye on those type of things.
Correct. In fact, I think the couple of things that came to mind when I looked at these headlines was, if this is the case, and I'm thinking like you thought about, what are the Gulf states going to do about it?
Right.
So if this is the dots that are beginning to connect, what the Gulf states going to do, and for them to stay as rich as they are today, then they have to look at greenfield projects to invest. They're looking to bring new technology in, education. Maybe that's what they are going to plan. So look at the headlines here, but the market is probably somewhere else there.
Right. And I'll tell you what you're seeing now in the Gulf is, both the Emirates and Saudi are working really hard. X number of years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 20 years ago, you had all these young people in the Emirates, young citizens in the Emirates and Saudi who were not very well educated with practical skills that they could sell because they didn't need to be. They knew that, if you were a citizen, you were probably going to get a check for the rest of your life, and why bother? And now they're really working at shifting into non-oil related revenue streams that can provide jobs for their citizens. And they're really working at that. So education, technology, light manufacture, all those type of things. The Gulf is really trying to build up that stuff. And, you know, if I were selling those type of products, those are the markets I'd be looking at, because, and they're going to boom for 8 or 10 years, and then it's going to stop booming. So this is the window of opportunity to be selling into those markets.
Absolutely. And simply as thinking as a skeptical or maybe pragmatic salesperson, I would think the non-fuel climate change, a big word to throw these days. And if you find a way to include it in your sales pitch, I think it's going to find some traction with someone somewhere. I'm being very hard-headed about it, but then whether you believe it or have a different political view doesn't matter.
You know, it doesn't really matter what your political beliefs are. You do have to follow the market, and you do have to be prepared, you know, to sell into your market, right?
Correct. And that's just being practical. There's nothing inherently wrong about it.
Right. Exactly.
These are the 4 headlines that I wanted to talk to today. If there are any other thoughts to add, feel free, Zach, or we can.
So I think we're facing interesting times. I think there will be changes. You know, with the changes in the U.S., I think there are going to be changes in other parts of the world too that you know are part of that. So I think we're facing interesting times. So we'll see how the coming year comes in terms of macroeconomics and how it changes the different markets. So we'll see. I'm very curious to see how things develop.
On that interesting note, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you everybody for listening to us.
Pleasure to spend time with you. Take care.
Take care.
Thanks for watching. If you find the video interesting, feel free to like and share. If you'd like to receive notification of next video, press the bell icon and subscribe. Have a nice day. Goodbye. Happy hunting.